Great to be with you today.
Thanks, John.
It's fun to have you here. I wanted to be able to share some of your insights with the newsletter list on innovation and mission that I send out to every month, and thought it'd be fun for us to talk a little bit about the importance of roles in AI and this idea of pilots and co-pilots in AI,
hmm
which we're hearing all about. And I'll talk about that more in a minute. But I'd love for you to just share a little bit about your background and kind of the intersection of aviation and the church and technology and what that's looked like in your life.
Sure. Well, first, thanks for the opportunity. It's great to be here, and hopefully, something I say or share will help someone in some way. My background has been mostly in technical world. I grew up thinking I was going to be a fighter pilot, so I got my license when I was young. So I got learned to fly at 16. Then life in college and other things kind of got in the way of that. Did not pursue the fighter pilot routine, but instead went to engineering, did some aerospace stuff, and went down an engineering path. And then I went into more of a software world, technology sales. I was fortunate enough to be able to take a kind of a hiatus, if you will, and move out of the corporate world and into the ministry world, and spent 7 years being on staff at a church in the Chicago Burbs area, which was a lot of fun, a lot of challenge, etc. And then came back out of that, back into tech for a while. And now I've kind of hung up my sneakers and I got a chance to get back into aviation. So I'm one of those rusty pilot guys that learned how to fly at a young age, exited flying for a while, and then came back at it in 2018. And I've been at it for a while. So I think I've had multiple roles in my career, been very fortunate to do that. And fortunate that God has been leading and guiding and opening doors and closing doors all along that path. And so I think it is interesting to think about, where has technology been? I've been in the technology space a long time, and, heard some of these things and seen some of these things in different ways. And now it's been big. Everybody's talking about AI and where's it going and what are we doing with it? I think in some ways it's, old news, new news. We've got a lot of things that we've always had to make decisions about with technology, and where is it appropriate, where is it not? Uh, and I think AI is no different, along that realm.
Yeah, no, that's a great observation that some things they even though they may feel really new and different, may not be as new and different as we think, right?
Yeah, exactly.
That's
Yeah.
right. So I think the one of the things that caused me, Jim, to reach out to you to have this conversation was that unique combination of your experience in the past and the subject of what are roles that are appropriate for people to have versus roles that are appropriate for AI or robots to have, right? And this whole world that we're
Mhm,
going into where we're having to make decisions about what is uniquely human and what are
mhm,
things that we're fine outsourcing to machines to help us with now that technology around
mhm,
AI is so much more powerful than it was even 8 months ago. The
mhm,
advances have been so huge. And
mhm,
one of the common terms you'll hear it a lot, like with Microsoft is using this word copilot, right?
mhm,
They're saying
mhm,
we're going to keep you in the driver's seat, user, Jim, as you use Microsoft Word or whatever it might be, but we want you to have a really good copilot. Other people are
mhm.
using words like assistant or facilitator, support, or all kinds of words, right?
Yeah, yeah.
But everyone's trying to distinguish between what's the human going to do when they sit down and make a PowerPoint presentation or whatever they're doing, and what's the machine going to be able to do. And so, I think it's really, really important that we talk about this because this isn't just a make the decision once and be done with it kind of thing.
Mhm,
Because the technology is advancing so much, almost on a daily basis, we're going to have to decide where's the line here. Am I okay with the
mhm,
technology doing this, but not this? When would I say no? When would I say yes? Right. And so there's a
mhm,
lot of questions here. And so this pilot co-pilot language, is some of kind of what's been used. So I'd love, first of all, put your aviator's hat on for a minute and talk a
yeah.
little bit about, what's the difference between a pilot and a co-pilot? How is that understood at kind of a high level, right? Well, obviously, we're not getting into the
Sure.
weeds of commercial aviation, but just at a high
Yeah.
level, kind of how's that understood?
Yeah. Well, I think there's a couple of main terms I would pull out is that, the in aviation, there's this concept called the pilot in command or the PIC. And the pilot in command is the pilot who is ultimately responsible for what's going on in the aircraft. Okay. So no matter if you're flying by yourself, you're the pilot in command because there's nobody else there, obviously. But if you have other crew, you have other people around or whatever, ultimate responsibility and ultimate authority is on the pilot in command. And now you have other factors at play. For example, there's air traffic control, and you have to work with them. But a pilot in command in certain situations is able to ignore ATC rules and commands and say, I can't do that, or based on situation awareness, I'm going to go this way. I'm telling you now what I'm going to do, because at the end of the day, if something bad happens, it's not on you, it's on me. So I have to exercise some of that authority. I have to do it responsibly. And, there's checks and balances along the way, and there's rules and guidelines that you follow. There's, pilot's operating handbook for a specific aircraft. That's everybody tells you how this thing's supposed to work and what you should and shouldn't do with it. There's airman certification standards, which is the FAA's way of saying, at least in the US, here's what a safe pilot looks like. Here's what the competency looks like. Here's what training you have to have. Here's other rules to guide you. So you have a lot of guidance and you have a lot of framework that you have to operate within. Um, but the reality is that, when it comes to flying, the pilot in command is the one ultimately responsible for the outcome and has the authority and the responsibility, put together. And hopefully they do that well. They do it with a humble attitude. When you read a lot about pilots and you get into different stuff, they always say, having your pilot's license is not a license to fly. It's a license to learn to fly, because you are always learning something new about flying. And so a good pilot is always learning is kind of a catchphrase that everybody says or different organizations say. Um, and so the pilot and co-pilot relationship would imply a degree of trust, a degree of humility, a degree of like, hey, this person's telling me something. I better not be so egotistical that I'm not willing to listen to them. And if you do accident analysis and do other things like that, that's oftentimes what happens. Egos in the cockpit, problems occur, don't want to hear from you. I get it. I understand this. I'm smarter than you. Bad things happen. So you need some humility worked in there. You need some framework in there, and then you need to think about outcomes. So I think that that's an interesting, that's kind of a framework that I would use, and we can talk a little bit later about, okay, how does that apply to the Christian walk, or how does that apply to AI? But hopefully that provides a good baseline anyway for like
Yeah, that's really
how it
helpful.
works.
I love that way of thinking, or how pilots tend to think about it, and I can totally see how that would then provide some hierarchy in an airplane when they have to make really quick decisions, right? And they don't
Right,
have a lot of time. It
right.
has to be very clear who does what, and there's not a lot of room for guessing and those sorts of things, right? And
That's right.
so
That's right.
so that becomes a really helpful way to think about then this idea. Um,
Yeah, absolutely.
I guess maybe here's a follow-on question, and this will come in real quickly when I ask my next question. But who would be the pilot's authority? So if you're piloting a plane, let's say you're piloting a plane and you do have someone who's your co-pilot next to you. So you're the
Hmm.
pilot, you're in charge.
Hmm.
You got your co-pilot. They're taking orders from you, but they're doing stuff as well. They're helping out. They're
Hmm.
working with you on the plane. Jim, when you think about who's your boss as the pilot,
Hmm.
how do you think about
Hmm.
that in terms of aviation and in terms of responsibility?
Um, well, there's a lot of factors. Some of them are like there's who's my boss at this moment, and then who's my boss going to be when I get on the ground.
Mm,
Okay, okay, because there's always that. Yes, you have rules and you have regulations, and you have the FAA in the United States. You have air traffic control who tells you what you can and can't do. But again, they're external things. And when I'm flying the plane, I'm in charge because I'm responsible if anything goes wrong. And I have to use all of these resources and all of these guidelines to do that. I also have to understand that when I get on the ground, I've got some splaining to do. If I did something I shouldn't have done, I might lose my license. I might have criminal charges. There's all kinds of potential consequences, but your mindset when you're flying is this is my responsibility.
Okay.
I have to get this done. But so I don't know that I think I have a boss, so to speak. If you just think purely from a model standpoint when you're flying, um, but you think about it when you get, when you land, there are going to be other bosses that have to get answered to. I don't know
That's
if that
yeah,
helps,
that's a
but
great point that the level of autonomy you feel is different based on where you are near
where
the
you are.
tower, on the ground, in the air, all by yourself out in the middle of nowhere, just flying. That's
Hmm.
really interesting. So now
Yeah.
let's apply it then. A lot of times in popular culture, I've heard phrases like if you're the pilot and God is your co-pilot, you're in the wrong seats. Or there's the country
Hmm.
song "Jesus Take the Wheel," or insinuating that Jesus should be
Hmm.
driving my car, not me. I should be taking the lead from Jesus. And so there's all
Right.
this talk about essentially who's in control of my life. Am I running my life, or is God in control? Right? And they use this
Right.
pilot, co-pilot, driver kind of metaphor, right?
Right. Right.
So now let's take that one step further. So let's imagine that we're the pilot. We've got this co-pilot, which is AI, which is subservient to us. It is a tool helping us do things,
Hmm.
but we have authority in our lives. Kind of
Correct.
like when you get
Yeah.
on the ground, we have authority. What does that look like to see both the authority we have as people and the authority we command or take over maybe tools and things that we use?
Yeah, yeah. So I think, it's an interesting concept because it almost, I think the analogy is not bad. I don't, obviously, like any analogy, we can't really we can't really understand and explain the Trinity and our spiritual relationship and all of that in some kind of a simple metaphor. But it generally holds together, I think, generally speaking. Um, and I think that the idea of us, when you answered like who's my boss in the air, or who's my boss, and it kind of depends on the situation. To an extent, I think that we could have all of these tools and we could have all of these things, and the question is like, what are you doing with them,
Mm.
right? Are you using them in a way that would represent what God wants you to do? I mean, if I think about, in creation, God created us as image bearers of Him, right? So, and then Christ said, like, what are we supposed? Somebody asked, what's the greatest commandment? Well, love God and love people, right? So if we're image bearers and we're supposed to be loving God and loving people, we can use whatever tool we want to do that. As far as I'm concerned, we use cell phones to do it. We use computers to do it. You could use AI to do it. It kind of doesn't matter in a sense, but the question becomes, are you also accountable? So maybe I take this pilot metaphor too far and I forget that when I'm done living this life and I land my airplane, I have some accountability, right? God's going to ask me, what did you do about Jesus, and what did you do with everything I gave you? How did you steward it? Like, what did you do with it? And so I try to think about that, and I think that this framework, it still kind of fits, because you get into a lot of ethics when you get into AI, and right now it's pretty simple, but it's getting a lot more capable. And so you've got a history of seeing AI either portrayed in films and movies as 2001: Space Odyssey, right? When Kubrick's definition of what Arthur Clarke wrote, and you see now the AI is very helpful, but all of a sudden he says, I need to come back in now, Dave. It's sorry, or not Dave. Talks to the computer. Sorry, Dave, I can't let you do that. Right. So now we see this idea of conscious and all this other kind of thing. We're nowhere near that, but it does represent a question about like who's in charge. And right now, AI does what we tell it to do, right? It can discover things, it can recommend things, it can predict things, and it can automate things. Those are really the main categories for getting, all the different variants. But how are you using those things? And did you just shut your brain off? Did you shut your ethics off? Did you shut your Christianity off? So that you can just like what, get ahead or make more money or Like why? What's your why about it? Is kind of how I think about it. Um, so I do think that we are in control of the AI for now. Um, that is true as long as we don't turn our brains off and don't turn our moral compass off.
Yeah.
And
That'll
that's
be the
that's
challenge, won't it?
that'll be the challenge. Yeah, because I think the easier things get, the less you want to think about it,
That's right. It's
right?
the tendency to take the path that we've made that's the easiest. Just like
Exactly.
watching the next show on the streaming service that starts in 5 seconds. It's
Yeah. Yeah.
becomes the thing that you don't have to think about, rather than
Yeah.
making the hard decision of turning off the television, for instance. Right.
Yes. Yes.
Um, Maybe as a last question, Jim, and then we'll wrap up. Like to maybe tie this together with as you've thought about technology, because you've also worked for some major corporations in the technology space, and I'm sure you've thought about the implications of tech on your faith and more
Yeah.
broadly. How have you looked at how technology can be used within the kingdom? Obviously, we're gonna have a lot of tough choices to make around AI and
Mhm.
the role it plays in the church and in mission and in kingdom work. But how have you wrestled with some of that in your own career and in the work that you've done?
Yeah. I think that it it does get back to sometimes it gets back to first principles, if you will, because I look at it as a technology that has immense capability. But the idea of having technology with immense capability and then having the ethics around it is not a new question to us. Um, it's funny, like even right now, Oppenheimer movie is out, right? And a lot of study of that. It's a biography about Oppenheimer, the guy who basically created the atomic bomb under the Manhattan Project in World War II, and it goes into some of the ethics around that. And if you think about the ethics of nuclear power and what it is capable of doing to produce electricity and do a lot of really positive things, as well as the power to destroy many things. It's a technology at its core, and you have to have a framework for operating with it. I think AI is similar to that.
Mhm.
Right now, it is not that complicated, but if you have any degree of imagination and you have any belief that it will continue to evolve and continue to get smarter and better and more capable, then I think it's that. And I have seen little examples of that where, especially if you're in a business development or a marketing arena, um, you can use technology well, and you can use it for really good purposes and to advance the kingdom. I've used the same technology in the business world that I use in the ministry world, and we went through campus expansions and had to go through video teaching, kind of realms back in the mid 2000s, and that was a huge deal. A lot of people were like, "How are you really my pastor if you're on a video screen?" Um, and I really want a pastor who's here with me, and I don't want to see you in the screen. If I was important enough, you would be here with me versus being just a video beaming station, so to speak. And that was an interesting conversation to have with people, and to also remind them that the same concepts came up when people started preaching over the radio, right? And they're like, "Oh, that's not real. The radio is satanic. It's bad. If I'm going to hear preaching, it has to be from a person's voice because Jesus talked on a hill over the water, and so you need to do that. And if you're not doing that, then it's bad." Then I don't think we would. I wouldn't agree that that's true, but I saw some of that surfacing, and it was like, here's a new technology. And video streaming and being able to do what we do now and take for granted was not as common then. You couldn't do it. It was very expensive to do, for one, and it was difficult to get it to work and stay reliable. And so pushing that envelope sometimes represents good, challenges that we have to think about. Why are we doing this? Are we doing it because we want um, we want to be cool and we want God to bless it? or we're doing it because we really feel like God wants us to advance, and this is a tool to help us do that. Like, what's the cart? What's the horse here? Are
Yeah.
you leading or are you following? Right.
Mhm.
And this could be applied anywhere in our Christian faith or anywhere in the church, as far as I'm concerned. So whenever you apply something, smoke machines, video, lights, AI, our pastor's going to be able to use Chat GPT to help them write sermons. And is that bad? That's a use of AI. People are doing it. People are using it to write things. Question is, is it helping them, or is it replacing them and they're not doing their work and they're actually not spending time discerning with God, like, where does God want me to go? I want to go here. Can I use this tool to help me go there? Or I don't know what to preach today, so I'm going to use ChatGPT to write a sermon for me because I really don't have the time.
It's yeah,
Right? I mean, these are interesting dilemmas, I think, and it gets back to what's the purpose and who's really driving it. So I don't know if any of that helps, but that's some of the
yeah.
examples of things I've seen, with technology. And if we're using it and we're learning about it and we have the right posture and we have the right humility and the right compass, I think we can still steer through it with any tool, regardless of what that tool is.
That's I think that combination you just shared is really helpful, Jim. I think it comes down to our motives, our posture as people of faith,
Hmm.
our ability to strategically and creatively use tools for those motives, and discernment to know when it's being real helpful and when it's no longer being helpful. And those things take a lot of prayer. And I think that's one of the things I think I'll leave us with in this video is that as we wrestle with these roles, and as we wrestle with with the metaphors that are helpful as we talk amongst our leadership teams, it's going to in the end come down to prayer and saying, God, help us to know when this is the right tool to help and when this is getting in the way of real ministry, real transformation, real serving of people. And it's going to be fun to see what God does as he walks us through that journey.
Yeah, very good. Thanks,
All right.
John.
Thank you so much, Jim. Appreciate your time today.
You bet.